Metropolix with MIDI. Hopefully my voice is coming through all right. Let's get the stream started. All right, we got Metropolix 1.4, and we're going to showcase it with Ableton Live. But this works with any DAW, so yeah, no, you can use it with Bitwig, anything that supports MIDI. You can use it with Norns, MPC Live, like the new MPCs, they take a MIDI host. Yeah, so let's dive into what's new on the Metropolix 1.4. The big thing is USB MIDI. It actually works using the port on the back of the Metropolix, and so what we've done is we've brought in I'm just going to slide the case over, and this way. We've made a really simple module. We're calling it a USB extender. It's not really an expander. It's more of a way to bring the cable on the back of the panel to the front. And so very simply, it's this top part here. The 3U panel comes with a mult, and then it also comes with a 1U faceplate that you can swap if you're just using the USB. Yeah, so that's available on the website now. So this Metropolix, this setup here, is just one of our kind of sequencing setups. It does not require the MIDI 1U, and actually works on a separate USB connection. So right now I have this connected to the 1U expander here. This one's not actually hooked up. And then the mult on it is passive, and then two 3-channel mults. So that's on the website. You don't need the USB extender to use the USB MIDI. If you want, you can just plug a cable onto the back of the Metropolix and run it out of a gap in the case, maybe between a couple modules, or if you have a custom case, you can install your own USB port on it. Yeah, so that's kind of the basics. But I wanted to go over the new things in 1.4 that aren't necessarily tied to MIDI. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on the screen. So a couple other things that we've added are 3 new GX modes. Make sure the GX is on the screen here. I'm actually using a QX. Stock was a little low, and I didn't actually have a GX here. Not a production one, anyways. So we're using a QX. It's actually the same module with a different faceplate, and then that's connected to Metropolix. And so I will get into all the MIDI stuff later. I see there's some questions already. This stuff is just general to Metropolix. If you're not using MIDI, you still get all these new things. So we'll go to the MX assign screen. So the original transport was renamed to transport A. That had some even divisions, like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, or there's 2 4s, I think. So that's transport A. We added a transport B, which adds, it's an odd and even mix of outputs. So we have run and reset, which is the same across all the transport modes. And then we have divide by 1, so that's the 16th pulse. Divide by 3, divide by 4, divide by 5, divide by 8, and divide by 16. We have a transport C, which actually has some multiplying modes. So we have run reset at the top again. We have times 4, times 2, 16th pulse, so times 1, or divide by 1, same. Divide by 2, divide by 4, divide by 8. And then we also had we also have a mode called probability clocks. This was brought to us by Powwow on the forums. So the first four outputs are all 1x clocks. So they're all 16th clocks. The top one has a probability of 100%, so that's a regular clock. The next one is 75%. The next one below that is 50%. And then the last one here is 25% probability. On the bottom set, we have a divide by 2 clock with the same setup. So 100% probability, 75, 50, 25% probability. And so you can get your standard clocks out and then some random outputs below that. That's the new GX modes. One of the other things we added, I'm just gonna zoom in on the screen a little bit here. This has been a feature request from a lot of people kind of all over the place. So I'm just going to go to a mod lane here. I'll maybe just pick an empty one. I think this is empty. So what we've added is, I'm just going to pause it. We've, in the all mode, or when you hold Alt or press Alt, it adjusts all of the parameters at once. What we've done is we've added a random, a morph, and an undo. And so if you're in Alt mode and you press undo, it'll undo any changes you've done since you entered the screen. So it'll go back to the state that it was when you started. If you press morph, it'll actually morph all of the stages by about 10%. And it depends on the parameter. And then if it's a gate toggle, it'll toggle the gates, but less aggressively than the full random mode. And so you can use this to get slight variation. If you copy one mod lane to another one, you can just hit morph a few times and get a little bit of variation. And then the random button here actually gives you full random. It'll randomize both parameters, the ramp and the level. And so undo will go back to where we were when we entered, and then this will re-randomize. So if we exit the screen and then go back and oops, and then we randomize again, if we hit undo, we'll go back to that state that we had when you came in. One of the other cool things is you can kind of randomize this. It's pretty aggressive, but you're still in the edit all mode, so you can actually just shift it up or shift the whole thing down from where you randomized. And then if you have something you like and you just want tweaks, you can hit morph, and then of course you get the toggles still, and then you can undo. So that works on any track parameter. So if we go to say ratchets, you can ratchets. You can go to Alt and then randomize the ratchets, morph the ratchets, and then undo. And so that works on any stage parameter. It also works on these on like track parameters, but oops. This may or may not be as useful to you. I think randomizing the stage parameters is a lot cooler, a lot more useful than randomizing these parameters, but you still get the undo. And so the nice thing about the undo is that it'll undo anything you do in the alt mode. And so you can actually change things temporarily, undo them when you leave the screen. Yeah, another little kind of performance piece in there. The last piece for non-MIDI users, and this came kind of by way of the MIDI, was in the track menu, we now have a option for velocity, and there's a new output assignment for A and B, velocity out. So if you go here, oops, it works very similar to, so we'll select velocity for track 1. And if we go back to the menu, so by default, this is set at 50%. So it'll output 2.5 volts. The velocity output is only 0 to 5 volts. It's unipolar. And then the full range is mapped to the CV. So if we set that velocity to track CV, and then we go to the CV lane, we can see here that this now says velocity/CV. So you can still output the CV on B if you want the bipolar version, but this now represents velocity for velocity output as well as the MIDI velocity for that track. And so the center line for velocity is 2.5 volts or 64, 63 in MIDI velocity. And so when you set this, this is now, when you go really quiet, it's actually very low velocity. Depending on how your synth is set up, you get pretty quiet notes. And then a lot of synths allow you to remap velocity to kind of whatever you want. And then for CV users, we're bringing that back as an output here. You can use that for accent or kind of whatever. And then, so you can set A and B to velocity out. Yeah. Also, if you're playing something with MIDI and then it's going through something with CV, you can use that velocity out to modulate along with your sequence. Yeah. All right. What else we got? I think that is it for non-USB updates. So let's dive into the USB setup on the Metropolix. It's fairly simple. We wanted to keep this as kind of a CV first module, so there's kind of a MIDI layer that sits on top, and it's pretty much all driven in the track menus and the mod menus. So you'll see a new MIDI section in the track menus. You actually see some options in the mod menu now. And then in the setup menu, there's a MIDI section. So you can set your clock source to MIDI. So right now I have, the audio you heard earlier was actually coming from Ableton, the wavetable synth and the analog synth, each running from track 1 and 2. And then the clock source is coming from Ableton. So if I change the clock in Ableton, it'll change the clock here. Oops. So that's kind of the first option. And then there's a MIDI section now. And so, we have a MIDI clock out option. That's grayed out because we're taking the MIDI from here. But if we set this to internal, we can now turn on the MIDI clock out. And so this will actually output via the USB port onto MIDI. Yeah. And then MIDI transport on, this works both directions. So if we're taking MIDI in and lost it. Transport is on, then the transports from MIDI controller, sequencer, other gear, or Ableton will toggle the run state on the Metropolix. MIDI transport off means it will just ignore, you can still take the clock, it'll ignore the start-stop commands from Ableton. You may run into like some phase issues and stuff then, just because the MIDI clock is 6 pulses per quarter note, or sorry, 24 pulses per quarter note. So generally you want to leave that on. That'll kind of keep the clock in sync. So even if you start the Metropolix, even if you start it later, it'll still kind of be on the grid. The last option in the global menu is Sysex transfer. I guess we'll show that real quick. With Sysex Librarian. So on the one half of my screen, we have Sysex Librarian. It's just a common free app. There's options for Windows as well. And so Sysex Transfer actually allows you to back up all of your presets, all of your state from the Metropolix. And so there's a few options here. We have Send All, which will back up all of your preset slots, the global settings, current state. You can just back up the settings and state, and then you can send presets. So you can send filled or all, or you can choose a bank and just back up one bank at a time. And so let's just do a quick Send All backup. So in Sysex Librarian on the computer, we're going to go record many. And then on the Metropolix, we're just going to select send all, and it's going to send the settings. And you can see the counter pop up on the, yeah. So we have 64 presets plus the settings plus the global settings. And that's why we have a total of 66 messages. And then you just hit done here. Not going to jinx myself and write it back to the Metropolix, but to write back, you would go to receive any, and the module will wait for incoming Sysex, and then you would just hit play here, and that will reload all of the whatever you send back. So if you back up a single bank into one file in Sysex Librarian and you play that back, it'll just receive that one bank. So you can back up the pink bank and then put it back, things like that. Or if you kind of store a bank with a song, you can store that with your Ableton project or whatever. Yep, that's the boring side of MIDI, but highly useful. The fancier side, I would say, is in Ableton. And so we're using Ableton here. It's kind of what we use to test things in the office. I use Bitwig for my own stuff. One of the other developers uses Logic. All of this stuff works great in all of them. Kind of different latency in all of them. Ableton tends to be one of the higher latency ones. Bitwig and Logic were better. Logic was definitely the best that we tried. Yeah, so let's dive into the MIDI. So the MIDI setup on Metropolix is pretty simple. So each track, I'll just go over the features real quick. So it connects as a Class Compliant USB MIDI device, which means you don't need any drivers. It works on an iPad. You just need the USB connector. If you have a newer iPad with a USB-C, you just need a mini to C cable, or you can use an adapter. And all of that stuff, and it just shows up as a MIDI device inside whatever application or synth you're connecting to. The channels, track 1 and 2, will send note on and off messages for one single channel per track. So if we go to track setup, so alt track, we can see that track 1 is going to channel 1. CV to CC, so we take the CV lane and convert it to a CC message on the same channel. And then we have options for slide toggle, slide amount, CC, and then the behavior of how slide amount works. And so I'll go into that later. Doing slide, glide, portamento, whatever you want to call it, glissando on MIDI stuff is obtuse. Like every synth handles it different. We managed to get it down to 3 options that kind of work for any situation. One of the cool things I won't really dive into, but since you can get CC from these, you can also assign those to kind of whatever you want. And so you can misuse the slide amount, slide toggle as kind of like to control other things other than slide or glissando. Yeah, so we can see track 1 is set to go on channel 1, and then track 2 is on channel 2, and that has a different slide setup. And then I'll go over that when we jump into Ableton. The mod lanes can each send out to a channel and a CC, and so you select the channel and you select the mod to CC, and it's a single assignment. Of course, in your DAW or on your synth, you can assign that CC to any number of parameters, and then in something like Ableton, you can change the range and the attenuation of that message coming in. What else we got? I think that's pretty straightforward. It's not a lot of setup on the Metropolix. It's probably, if you're familiar with connecting any other MIDI controller, it's pretty much the same. So let's dive into Ableton. So I'm going to mute, oops. I'm going to mute the bass line, mute the mod lanes. We'll just get track 1 going here. It's going to duck out when I talk and when I bang the table, so hopefully I can control that a little bit. It's just me here too, so not really looking at the chat yet. I've got Daniel monitoring that for some additional questions, and then we'll jump to those at the end. All right. So we have, let's go over the Ableton setup real quick. Preferences. So inside the MIDI, this is always different for every DAW. Hope this zoom works. Oh yeah. So we're gonna just scroll down. Oops. To this bottom section here, and then yeah, so we're going to select MIDI in from Metropolix. So if you want the clock from Metropolix to control Ableton, you can select that here. Metropolix only does one at a time, so you can leave this checked on even if you're using it the other way. You can set the delay here if you want to kind of get it all in sync. And then for output, you just set the out. There's no CC. The Metropolix won't listen for any CC, so you can't modulate the Metropolix options with CC. Right now, it's just a very simple, the mod lanes, the tracks, all output, notes and CC, and really it's like it's the sequencer available kind of anywhere now. Yeah, so that's the setup in Ableton, and then so my project here, I have my synths, and then I have Metropolix track 1 coming here to a wavetable synth, and then I have Metropolix channel 2 coming to the analog synth. I just pulled up a couple presets from Ableton, and so let's have a look. And so let's get this going. So you can see here, if we start here, then the synth will start in Ableton. Just have the monitor on. If you turn that off, it'll stop monitoring. If you put on auto and then arm it, it will arm for record. One other awesome thing, and I'll leave this to everyone else to explore, is recording clips. And so if we set this to record, now we're recording the output of Metropolix. You can see it there. And then if we change the pitch, you can also see the velocity automation going in there. So if we go to track 1, CV, and then let's randomize this. Oops. So you can see the automation for velocity at the bottom here. We're getting that new pattern. So you can take a pattern here, you can go to a new clip, randomize, and then when you hit play on the clip, it'll actually take over from Metropolix. And so Metropolix playing in the background, I can actually stop it, and we're still getting the notes. So that is kind of awesome. Just capturing jams. And then fine-tuning at the end. You can see the latency is pretty good. Quite often, if you turn on quantizing, it'll be very tight. But depending on the quantized resolution, if you have swing or ratchets turned on, then some of that stuff may get quantized out. And so what we tend to do is kind of just select all the notes and then just drag one of them and snap it back to the front, and then they'll all be pretty much on the grid at that point. And that's just accounting for kind of the latency of the clock going out to Metropolix and then Metropolix going back into Ableton. you'll find different kind of latency, and if you've ever set up a sequencer or controller with Ableton or any DAW, you'll know dealing with latency is a whole other topic. Yeah, so that's a really quick hit on some of the cooler kind of side things. Yeah, let's go into kind of how this track is set up. So we just have the soft chord preset. Just gonna get rid of these. We'll play. And so in here, I actually have this on poly, which is something kind of awesome for sending a mono sequencer into polysynth. You end up with that overlap. And so if we turn that off, you'll hear quite a different sound. And so almost acts as like a, I don't know, you just get those reverbs, you get those tails, like just sounds so much more full. And then playing with the amount of voices is also pretty wild. You can also send both tracks to the same channel for kind of a poly, like a dual note poly playback. If you use track inversion, things like that, you can get quite a wild. As you move the slider up, you spread the notes out. As you go to the middle, you pull the notes back in. All of the accumulator, all of that stuff, ratchets, probability, all of that stuff will get translated into like modified note values or things like that. Yeah, so let's see how we do CC here. And so let's just stop. Let's go. Let's use a mod lane. So I think I have this set up already. So I have a mod lane here. It's not assigned to anything in the synth. And if we go to the menu, it's assigned to channel 1, mod to CC 0. And so we're going to stop Ableton and we're going to do a learn. And so let's learn on this. So we're going to go edit MIDI map. I'm going to click here. And then we're just going to move one of these. Can I modify this? Oops. Oh, we're muted. Why isn't this learning? Oops, still muted. It should be. Oh, I'm using the sliders, not the encoder. So, sorry. There we go. So you'll see here, channel 1, mod 0. And so what you have to do to assign, go to learn, click on a parameter, and then turn the encoder to change the value, and that will output CC messages. And so now we're controlling mod on both of these parameters. And so if we go to playback, oops, turn off MIDI. We'll see both those parameters move with the mod lane. And then on the mod lane, we can do the random. We have a div by 16, so we can make it a little faster. You can see on the Metro, here's the modulation pattern. Oops. So it's a little too extreme. You can always bring it up like this too, toggle out, and then bring that shape down, and then morph those. and now we have a mod lane. If we mute the mod lanes, oops, then the modulation will stop outputting. So that's how you sign a CC. It's pretty easy when you remember how to do it. Yeah, let's jump into slide. And so I think I'm going to show that on the other track because the slide response on this synth is not as kind of noticeable, and when you put into poly mode, it's definitely not noticeable because it gets disabled. Yeah, so let's move this track. Let's check out the other track here. Let's unmute it on here. Track 2. Oh. Okay, so we have this really sparse kind of bass line going. Very sparse. Div this. Bring this in. It's probability. Oh, I think I might have a mod lane. Oops. Okay, so with slide, let's see how this track is set up. Alt track 2. So we're on channel 2. For slide, we have slide toggle set to CC65. So we get this MIDI. So if we look here, CC65 is set to glide on off. Sorry, CC65 set to glide on off, and so that will actually toggle the glide button here. It's actually covered up by the MIDI interface, and then CC5 is set to glide time, and that controls the level. And so I think I have. It's playing so slow. There we go. Okay, so you can see here, set this to slide. So we can see the slide steps here. And then I have slide amount on the control 2 knob. So right now, nothing set to slide. We have it in analog mode. So let's do some more extreme. So we can actually see in Ableton the glissando is toggling on, and then the time is going from 0 to whatever we have the knob set at. And so depending on the synth, so let's just toggle them all on. So I have the octave range on this track pretty low just for the bass line. But here it is with the off, 0% slide. So if we crank it up, this range on this is actually going to smooth it out so the notes aren't actually really even changing that much. So I was mentioning earlier, because you can just assign these to any CCs. I have these assigned to kind of the typical expected portamento CCs, but you can assign this to anything. And then you can assign slide to control any other parameter. And so if you want to toggle the oscillator on and off, you could learn slide to that. And so the way these three options work, the toggle message is the slide toggle. So when this is toggled on, it'll send a message on that channel on 65 with a value of 127, and then when the stage is over, it'll go back to a value of 0. And so that's the toggle CC. The amount CC comes from where slide is set to. So it's mapped from a range of 0 to 100 on the Metropolix to 0 to 127 as a CC value. And so each so as the module is going and you're changing the CC value, it's sending out CC messages unquantized. And so the last parameter changes the behavior of how the CC works. And so let's get this going again. Okay, so we're going to toggle half the stages on slide, and if we look at the glissando section here, you'll see that the time value is changing. So I'll wiggle the knob. The time value is changing only when the slides are toggled on. And so if we go to always, then this Ableton's going to hide it, but we're changing the slide time all the time now. And so depending on your synth, you may or may not want to use the slide toggle. If you just set the amount to toggle, so if we take off, change this to toggle, and then we'll just change this to a different one. Then if we toggle glissando on here, the synth is not, these toggles aren't going to affect it because they're no longer sending a CC out. But so this is set to toggle. So this slide amount message is only going to be set when these are toggled on. If we change that to always, it's ignoring these the slide buttons now and just always sending a glissando amount. And so in this synth, 0 will basically disable it. This will turn it on. And now, if we want to, I'm going to stop this. If we want to learn, let's see, turn off the filter. So if we go edit MIDI map, and then we toggle slide, so now we'll learn that new slide channel there. And then get out of here. So now we're actually going to toggle the filter on when this is playing. So this gives us so right now no filter, but the filter only comes when so we have a full new, this this now controls the filter. This controls the slide. So if we mod lane the slide from, if we use a mod lane to control slide on track 2, then, we can control that. But now we have a whole nother parameter to play with, like a toggle parameter. Vice versa, if you like a fixed slide amount, you can make the buttons toggle slide on and then use the slide control to do something else. And then the CV portion of this will all remain the same and work the same. Alright, just gonna turn that off. Yeah, so I think that's the basics. There's not really anything else to go through. It's pretty bare bones as far as UI. It's like a few menu options for each track, but when you start doing preset chains or capturing like performances in clips or in the arranger, like it becomes so powerful for just kind of any you kind of get it just goes so much further than it did before. You can always get that kind of stuff by patching, but the way CC and MIDI works is it's so different. You can get those CCs and mold them out everywhere. If you have any note effects, like Bitwig has note effects. If you do a really slow tempo with the Metropolix, and then use the arpeggiator or some of the kind of bounce modes, and I know Ableton has a lot of this too. You can kind of get, a lot of them are controlled by really long gates, so if you tie all the stages together, you can get really cool other MIDI patterns out of Metropolix. If you have chord generators, you can start to get polyphony out of there, things like that. So I'm just gonna put on my little jam here, and then kind of review some of the questions, and then jump back into it. It's just me today, so one-man show. Quick shout out to Jesse. This is his last day at Intellijel today. I'm gonna miss him. There's a question: Can the CVX be used in concert with Metropolix to allow for more MIDI CCs? No, right now there's no CVX support on Metropolix. Someone asked what the resolution of the CC. It's just 0 to 127 standard CC messages. We didn't get too fancy with NPRN or anything like that. Yeah, I think that's about it. Of course, all that track information saves with the presets. Yeah. I guess we'll play it out. Unless there's anything major, keep an eye on the chat. I'm going to scroll through it again just one more time. And yeah, have a good day. Thanks for joining in, and I will post the update as soon as the stream is over. Hopefully, should be up in the next half an hour or so. Yeah, thanks for watching. This will work with any USB MIDI host. So MPC Live, Monome Norns. If you have a USB, like USB A to TRS adapter, you can use that. Yeah. So. Yeah, I think that's it. One more. Anyone who's done a firmware update knows that there's a button on the back to press to update the firmware. Now that the MIDI is on the front, that seemed kind of annoying. So we figured out how to do an update firmware from the menu. This works for anyone. This is not a USB MIDI thing. Yeah, if you have any, if there's any further firmware updates, you can just go update firmware from there, and it will put it into bootloader mode. You can use the extender to do the update. That is it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.